Hello, Salida Schools. It is time for the 2020 CMAS annual training for anyone who is a test administrator or in the testing environment at all for our CMAS assessment system. This is Amy Ward, and this is the most exciting training you will ever do. So here we go. Some topics that we have to cover during this training, and some topics will be covered by your school assessment coordinator. We are going to go over the CMAS administration overview, testing schedule, the policies and testing security, and tasks to complete before testing. Then your school assessment coordinator will be going over those tasks to complete during testing, mainly how to navigate Pearson Access Next, those things to do after testing, and any resources or support that you will need through your school assessment coordinator. So just a quick overview. First of all, to get and log in to the Pearson Access landing page, here is the URL, co.pearsonaccessnext.com. You should go ahead and bookmark that on your page. Once you get there, here is what the landing page looks like. You will click sign in. You should do that right away. You should have, if you're a new teacher to us, you should have already been registered through Jem Sampson, and you should have gotten an email from Pearson asking you to set up your account. So also on that page there are some helpful links, and right here I will talk about this a lot during our training today. coassessments.com will be a good helpful page, and that's where all your released items are found and your training practices for students, and there's also some training little short videos for you if you need some refreshers before testing, how to navigate Pearson Access, and then also get involved. Colorado Department of Education every summer runs sessions on item reviews and writing of new test items. This is extremely beneficial for those ELA, math, and science and social studies teachers. So first of all, when are we testing? The official testing window begins April 6th. However, we applied for and got our early window, which can start as early as March 30th. But first of all, for CMAS COALT, which is Colorado Alternative, which is the test our most impacted students take for CMAS and PSAT and SAT, the social studies test, no one has to take social studies this year. Yay, we're in a bye year. But we do every year take the science test for both CMAS and COALT, and that's students in grades 5, 8, and 11. That test starts by April 6th, but no earlier. The CMAS math and ELA test, and there's also a Spanish ELA test for students who are first year in the United States in grades 3 and 4. We call that the CSLA. And that test can start as early as March 30th, but all tests must end, even makeup sessions, by April 24th, 2020. The COALT test, which is given by the most wonderful Nancy Powers, she will be she does all of our testing 3 through 11 with COALT, and she aligns that and organizes that with the special education providers, and that is aligned to our math and ELA schedule. All right, what's new this year? The first thing, there's a new CMAS and COALT resource portal which is kind of a one-stop shop for all things CMAS. It is coassessments.com, and I'll talk more about that later. The other thing that is new this year, because there were so many misadministration due to mistiming of the test in the last couple of years, they have now put into place some additional supports for that. So at the beginning, in your manual, in your TAM, the Test Administrator Manual, there is a table at the beginning of each set of say directions. Please fill out, this is a table for the math, grade 6 through 8. Please fill this out. You will put when your test started, when you're going to say the 20-minute warning, when you are going to say the 10-minute warning, and when that test stopped. Also, you will need to adjust warning and stop signs if you use the optional 3-minute stand and stretch break during the unit, if your students start getting a little wiggly, but make sure that is reflected in the timing. But also, a lot of people miscalculate their timing, and that is a big problem. So now in each TAM, Test Administrator Manual, there's a table that will help you with the timing to make sure that our students have all the correct timing. So please use that support. So when you're thinking about your testing schedule, you know that first day of testing is a little stressful, and it always takes a little longer. So you should prepare for about 10 minutes for reading all those say directions and making sure you get that script correct. And then about another 5 minutes of distributing the test materials and then whatever testing time, and then about 5 to 15 minutes for the end of unit testing activities. And after that first day, this gets much more streamlined and you get used to doing it. Just make sure that you know how long your testing session is. So there are some, your school assessment coordinator should have some handy handouts for you that will let you know each unit and how long they are. I'm not going over them all, but it's your responsibility to make sure that you absolutely know how long each test is. And just a small note on the math, grades 6 through 8, remember that math test, that first unit has a non-calculator section and a calculator section. You even have to submit the answers for the non-calculator section before you move on to the calculator section, because both of those must be done within the 65-minute period. If we are giving, most of the time people use the pop-up calculators that are built into the test. However, if a student does need to use a handheld calculator, we need to make sure that it meets the guidelines. And so there's the URL to make sure that those calculators are correct. Okay, guidelines for administration time. So first of all, you need to make sure that you add the unit testing time to the start time to determine the stop time. You need to triple check this. Miscalculation of the unit testing time will result in a misadministration and invalidation or suppression of the student test scores, and we don't want that. You need to make sure that you do provide the entire amount of unit testing time for all of your students who are testing. Once the unit testing time is met, time is up, the unit must end even if you have a couple of students still testing. Heartbreaking, I know, but it ensures the standardization of the test. Only students who have an IEP 504 or ELL plan are allowed the extended time accommodation. READ plans do not qualify for this. However, let's say you have 25 students testing and everybody finishes in 40 minutes and the testing time is 60 minutes, is when everyone finishes, you may end the testing time. However, let's say everyone has finished except for that one student. You cannot encourage that student to finish the test early. You must give the entire time available. And we've already gone over the extended time. For math and ELA, time and a half is not included in the unit testing time for students who have that accommodation, and therefore they are in a separate testing environment. However, for the science test, we have a bi-year for social studies. Whoop, whoop. The time and a half is included, and so students with disabilities could be in the same room as everyone else, even though they have time and a half, because it's all built into the assessment. However, if students need more than time and a half, that would be students with an accommodation, IEP 504 or ELL plan, could have double time and would have to be in a separate testing environment. Okay, what are those administration policies and test security? First of all, active administration is so important to maintain standardization of the assessment so that the score in Salida, Colorado means the same as students in Denver or Sterling or Meeker or Cortez. We need to make sure that our students have everything they need for each unit, including scratch paper. We need to make sure we ensure a standardized testing environment, follow all directions and scripts exactly as written, move throughout the room instead of grading papers, even though we know we really need to do that. Reread and clarify the TAM say directions, which are those general directions that are read aloud to all students from the TAM, the Test Administrator Manual, to students when asked. So what that basically means, first of all, you're going to say all those directions exactly, and then you can paraphrase and clarify in your own words if students need more than those exactly written directions. But even on the 6th day of testing, you need to be reading those directions exactly as written. Make sure you use your proximity to keep students on task, and if students are off task, please use the continue working script that's in your TAM with the most glaring teacher looks possible, but please do not deviate from that script. What are other prohibited activities? You may not engage in activities that impact the validity, the reliability, or the fairness of the assessment, and that means no providing feedback or coaching students, clarifying test questions, reading passages, sources, or test questions to students unless it's an accommodated section, answering content-related questions, interfering with the student's demonstration of skills, interacting with students in any way that would impact their student response. Please do not allow students to communicate with each other in any way or use prohibited materials or engage in any other tasks during test sessions. You may not actively read or view assessment items or content before, during, or after testing unless it's part of an accommodated group. Actively read, view, score formally or informally, or comment on student responses unless, of course, it's an accommodated session. Please do not leave test materials unsecured. Disclose or discuss any test content through verbal exchange, email, social media, or any other form of communication, even if it's something so cute that a student wrote or something you can't believe a student wrote, or download any part of the assessment unless, of course, it's part of an accommodated session. I will say that it is our responsibility. If you notice that a student wrote something very concerning that might compromise the health of that student, you need to make sure that you let your school assessment coordinator know. All right, breaks. There's going to be breaks in between sessions, especially if you are doing more than one session per day. This is especially true for 11th grade science, because I know you guys do all 3 sessions, one right after the other. The students are going to want their cell phones in between the sessions, but they cannot have them. Make sure that you do include a short stand and stretch break if students need it. It can be no longer than 3 minutes and must be calculated into the timing of the test. And restroom breaks do not stop the clock. Makeup testing. So if a student is absent, or let's say they become ill, or can't finish the assessment for whatever reason, we need to make sure that we schedule the makeup testing in order. Students are not allowed, actually the online test won't allow them to go back to previously completed portions of the test, but if students are at a paper-based test, which we do have some that are doing that, then you'll need to monitor that a lot more carefully. Make sure, even in makeup sessions, we have to use the test security protocols that are in place, and all of those content areas must be administered in order. So if a student is absent for session 1, no matter what test it is, English, math, science, when they come back, they need to do session 1 before they do session 2. We pretty much won't let them on the online platform, but you have to watch that if it is a paper-based test. So, guidelines for administration. So after each unit is finished, students can sit quietly or they can read. They can read a magazine, they can read a book. They cannot read anything electronically. They can't play on the computer. I did see a little bit of that last year. They can't play computer games. They can't draw. They can sit quietly or they can read. Those are the 2 choices. Something that your team, not just your individual team, but your school team, your school need to decide is if there is going to be a minimum time set for the testing environment. So, for example, are you going to say, okay, you aren't allowed to submit your answers until at least 20 minutes into the test, 30 minutes into the test? That way students aren't just rushing through and submitting their answers within 5 minutes of the test, but that's something that is a building decision, not a district decision. When you are looking at your TAM, your Test Administrator Manual, there are some optional say directions. So we are going for option C. Make a note of that. So basically that says students may read when they are done testing. Now, scratch paper is mandatory for math, but for ELA and science, it's an option. So that is another decision that your building will need to make. Are you going to give scratch paper for ELA for students to plan out their writing, or for science in case they need to jot something down to figure something out? If you are, then you need to make sure that you skip down. There's optional say directions. You will need to use those say directions for using scratch paper. All right, so what are some other consideration? Administrative considerations aren't really accommodations. However, they may be changes to the conditions of testing that will benefit a student. They are available to any student as long as test security is not compromised and that the test environment requirements are met. So, what are they? Adaptive and specialized equipment or furniture like stand-up desks, frequent breaks that do not stop the clock, noise buffers so students can focus like headphones, small group testing, specified, separate, or alternative area or seating, time of day, go back there, those, any student can get those, and your school assessment coordinator is already considering those. So if you have a student that you want to advocate for, please meet with your school assessment coordinator. Accommodations and accessibility features. So accommodations are those features that only students with a 504 IEP or ELL plan can access. Students on READ plans do not qualify for accommodations. Accessibility features can be students with a 504 ELL plan or IEP or READ plan, or any other student that demonstrates a need and they use those features throughout the year. So, if you are administering an accessibility feature or an accommodation, you need to make sure you're trained to do so. So, what are some of those major ones? There's a lot, but these are the ones we run into most often. Auditory presentation. This could be an oral script or text-to-speech. Oral script is a paper-based assessment. Text-to-speech is the computer-based assessment. So let's talk about ELA. So because it's testing students' reading and writing and communication, they cannot have text-to-speech or oral script unless two qualifications for that. First, it's a unique accommodation request for students with the IEP or 504. ELL plan does not qualify for that. It requires CDE to approve. We did apply for just maybe 2 students in the whole district, maybe 3. And for those students, they will, if they were approved, which I actually don't know the exact list yet, those students can have an oral script if it is a paper-based, or if they need sign language, which we don't have anyone, or the English text-to-speech. Now, for math, science, and social studies, it's an accessibility features, which means any student who uses it in day-to-day instruction can have access to it. It could be English text-to-speech. It could be Spanish text-to-speech. The other one is a scribe. So, for English language arts, constructed responses, there are 2 ways to do this. Either the student tells the adult what their answer is. This is where the human captures the essence of the response and the human types it in. That would be the test administrator. This is a separate administration, one-on-one administration, and it is a unique accommodation request that requires CDE approval, and we have just a handful that have been approved for that. Or more often, especially with the rise of dyslexia, it's a device-captured response. And that way, it's just an accommodation. It doesn't have to be a UAR, but it is an accommodation. And that is where the student is like talking into an iPad on airplane mode, can't connect to the internet. The device captures what the student says, and then the student can then type it into their test on their Chromebook. Or an adult can also type it in on their test. Math or science constructed response, whether it's a device capturing the response or a human capturing the response, it's an accommodation that can be selected for our students. And we have several students who will be using that. Okay, technology for medical monitoring. We have a couple of students or several students who use a device to monitor their glucose levels or other things. And they can, that's the only exception where students could have a cell phone in the testing environment besides the text. Well, they can't have a cell phone for the speech to text, but it could be a device captured with an iPad on airplane mode. But if a student uses a phone to monitor their medical needs, then we have to have documentation in place We need to follow the plan for the use of these devices, like where it's located, who has control of the device. If the student is monitoring it themselves, then the device has to be visible at all time and cannot be used for any other purpose. And we have to have procedures in place if the device alerts. So what happens next? Chain of custody. This is a necessity to document any movement of the secure test materials like testing tickets or booklets before, during, and after the test. We have to sign and complete the chain of custody form whenever checking materials out or in. Whenever you receive materials like scratch paper or oral script for translation, student testing tickets from your school assessment coordinator the day of testing, you should only receive the content area and the grade level being assessed at that time. It's your responsibility, it's our responsibility to make sure that we are maintaining the security of all of our assessments. They must be secured, the assessments must be secured while in your possession at all times. You cannot duplicate any of the materials. There can be no cell phones or other communication, reproduction, recording devices. They are not allowed during the testing session unless it's required for accessibility and an accommodation. Students should be aware that cell phones or other electronic devices are prohibited. Students who are found with electronic devices in their possession during testing, including if they have finished testing but other students have not, or during a break, may lead to the invalidation of not only their test but everybody else in the room. All individuals are strictly prohibited from taking photos of the test nav screen or any other secure testing materials. So what is secure? Your testing tickets, because they have personal identifiable information, rosters that are printed from PA Next, any oral scripts, any visual description of documents, used scratch paper, even if it's just a picture of a flower in the sun, any used work responses from assistive technology devices, any printed math reference sheets or the high school science periodic table. That would only be for paper-based testing, because the computer-based testing, those things pop up on them. And even in the directions, I think what is really confusing is that I think some of the directions say you need to pass out the math reference sheets. And every year I get a panic email or call, where are the math reference sheets? Well, they pop up in the test. Really, the only students who would have those would be a paper-based assessment, which we do have a few as an accommodation. What's not secure? That test administrator manual. You can take that home, read it, reread it, highlight it, make sure you know what you're testing when you're testing, and you know where those directions are. Your procedure manuals, which you probably don't interface with much, as mainly your school assessment coordinator. Any unused scratch paper is fine, and those math reference sheets and periodic table, if they're not written on. If they're written on, then they're secure. Headphones, they are required for text-to-speech forms. Unless if a student has a sensory issue and they need text-to-speech, but they can't do headphones and they need to be tested in a separate environment, just one-on-one. Headphones, to be in a testing room with other students, the text-to-speech form, headphones must be worn. And we already talked about that. They could also be used for noise buffers. I will say that for the elementary, everybody wears headphones for noise buffer, so you can't tell the difference between who has text-to-speech and who doesn't. For secondary classrooms, that percentage of students who have text-to-speech starts to, get fewer and fewer as more you go up. I would not put those students in the same testing sessions. If they are embarrassed, they may not use their headphones. So it would be important to have them in separate testing environments. When we first started Park, every session had, even ELA had like a little video, so all students had to use headphones. But for CMAS, that's not true. There's no audio unless a student needs text-to-speech. Room configuration with the computers. This is really important because students should not be able to see each other's work from a normal testing position. You need to make sure that you follow some testing configurations to maintain the test security. So you could seat students in every other seat, arrange monitors back to back, set students back to back, seat students in a semicircle, widely spaced rows, every other row, using dividing screens or other privacy materials, but students should not be sitting side by side. If I walk into a room and I see students sitting right next to each other, I'm going to pause the testing session until that room is reconfigured. In the testing environment, make sure it's adequately lit, quiet, clean, free of distractions. Sometimes if our classrooms, I get it, I get cluttered. But if your environment is cluttery, then, if that's a word, then sometimes that distracts from students, makes them anxious. Make sure that students have an adequate writing surface, especially for paper-based, but even on the computers, for math, for the scratch papers, students need room to work those problems out or plan their ELA constructed response. Needs to be free of music. I know we have some people who, and I do too, believe in a little background soft music, but it's not allowed for testing because you never know which students could be bothered by that. Make sure you have appropriate signage on your door. Make sure you display the unit testing time, and you triple check all your units testing time and stop time calculation by using those new tools in the TAM. All right, prohibited materials for your environment, no cell phones. The only exception is you as a test administrator could have one for emergency use only, but the ringer and the vibration should be turned off. You should not be using your cell phone for timing. Use the clock in the room and make sure that students have access to see the timing as well so they can track themselves. The exception, of course, would be students that are monitoring medical conditions. Other electronic devices would be e-readers, personal document scanners, electronic pens, smartwatches, iPods, instructional aids relevant to content being assessed, any reference books, with the exception of word-to-word dictionaries, which some of our ELL students use. They don't have definitions, but it's simply the Spanish word and the English word. No food or drinks are allowed on desk or near test materials. That's weird. All right, testing environment. Your walls should be free of any content-related posters or aids that may suggest possible answers to students. So any specific definitions, content-related processes, or solutions may remain on the wall. Prohibited visual aids in the testing environment must be removed or covered, such as number lines, word walls, steps to solving math equations, maps, charts, models, or any other content-related material. Any resource that defines, explains, or illustrates terminology or concepts in the area being assessed needs to be covered. All right, this is typically not a problem for us. Test and student to test administrator ratios 30-1. Please actively monitor your space. Consider your room configuration. Please actively proctor. I know you're tempted to grade all those English papers or whatever, but our responsibility is to actively proctor those tests and remain active during the entire testing unit. Circulate through the classroom. you should be able to see students working, not student work. Although I know at times you can't help it. All right. Only students, test administrators, and examiners should be in the testing environment. Your district and state personnel are allowed, and sometimes if there's a technical problem and Jake or William come into the testing environment, that's okay. They sign off on the security agreement as well. No media and no parents allowed in the room at all. If you suspect that there's a security breach, something weird, a testing irregularity, call your school assessment coordinator immediately and be prepared to provide a written summary. If we have a safety threat or severe weather, know the plan. But first of all, take care of kids first. If there's enough time, you can note the time of the disruption, you can secure the test materials, and then upon return, prepare the students to continue the unit and resume the tests. Document the situation in writing. But let's take care of kids and ourselves. Okay, before testing, student readiness. It's important for our students to practice on the resources. So, where are they? coassessments.com. We have a new acronym. I know you're all excited about that. They used to be called EPATs, but now we call them CPRs, Colorado Practice Resources. Those CPRs, there are CPRs on that website for computer-based testing and paper-based testing. There are CPR guides that include the scoring information and answer keys and rubrics. There's also an updated test nav tutorial with a walkthrough of the various items types. Because during testing, we can't help students with the navigation. We can help students log on and we can help students log off, but we cannot help them answer a question or show them how to go on to the next question or to the review screen. We can't help them with the drag and drop or any other technology enhanced items, and that is why it's so important to make sure students have the tools they need before the assessment. This is what the screen would look like for the computer-based testing. There are item sets for the computer-based practice by content area, the text-to-speech version. So if students have that accommodation, they should be practicing with it. If they are using the Spanish text-to-speech, they should be practicing with it. And on that new resource, there are paper-based assessments as well. It is really important when you get your testing sessions to make sure that besides student's name, they have the right indicator for accommodations like text-to-speech, Spanish text-to-speech, assistive technology, because if a student starts a test and all of a sudden they're like, Ms. Ward, I'm supposed to have text-to-speech and I can't hear anything, and indeed we make a mistake, we triple check, quadruple check that stuff, but every year we seem to miss one. So please check your lists before the test starts, because once the test starts, we can't do anything about it, and it is now a test and misadministration. So make sure on the day before testing, you prepare your testing environment. You make sure you have your TAM and you read it. The first day of testing should not be the first time you read it over. Please know what, when, and where testing will take place. Make sure you have all of your materials. Scratch paper, calculators if needed. Most of the time, students use the calculators in the assessment, but every now and then, some students would do better with a handheld. So, Managing test sessions in Pearson. Your SAC is really going to go over this, but I'm just going to do a quick overview. Make sure you know the student test status key. When you first get your test sessions in Pearson, all the students are going to be gray, which means they're ready to log in. When they're testing, they're going to be green. If they're resumed, let's say they got sick and you had to pause the test, they're going to be in orange. If a student gets kicked out of the test for some reason, or maybe they just exited the test, it's going to be red. And once they're completed, they're going to be blue. You need to know that you can log into Pearson Access Next, how to unlock and lock a session. That's going to be your main responsibility, and navigating and just monitoring test activities during testing. You need to know how students will log in so you can help them log into TestNav. Understand the test indicators, manage student interruptions, and be able to resume student tests as needed. Your SAC will cover that. Verify units are in completed session, and if they're not, there are some steps to do that your SAC will go over. If the student finishes and it doesn't show as completed on your screen, and I should have deleted this one, I didn't catch it, you will not be stopping test sessions. All you will do is unlock and lock the units. Jim Sampson will be stopping all the test sessions, so don't stop it. All right. All of that information is found on that one-stop shop website, coassessments.com, and there are some training modules that you could do if you want more information about that. Your school assessment coordinator will be coming around and going over the specifics of test management in Pearson Access Next. The other important thing is you need to know how to unlock and lock your test sessions. This will be the main thing that you're going to be doing, is before students can log in. Your students are in front of you. You're kind of nervous on that first day. You got all your directions, and you go through the directions, and you follow the directions to have the students log in. Don't have the students log in before the directions tell you. Sometimes we get really nervous and we're not following the directions. We give them their testing tickets and say, okay, log in. Your directions will tell you when that's appropriate and it's time. But let's say it's time and students log in and nobody can log in. They're like, oh, I can't log in. More than likely, you forgot to unlock session 1. That's going to happen to about 10 test administrators on the first day of testing. And then you'll get used to it. But remember, if you have a student absent on Unit 1 and they come Unit 2, everybody's going to start Unit 2, and you're going to have to keep that session locked for that student and then unlock Unit 1 for that session. In all sessions, you can do this. The directions are the same with the exception of 6th through 8th grade math. Unit 1 and 2 are different. So they're going to actually, if they're absent for Unit 1, they're going to have to make up Unit 1 in a different session before they can join back with your session again. Okay, you can only unlock one session at a time. We've already talked about makeup units. You can unlock them individually, and all units have to be done in order. And that's really easy for the computer-based testing, but for paper-based testing, it's really important that you are monitoring and you don't let students move forward to the next unit. It's so easy to do in a paper-based assessment. Hint, hint, 3rd grade ELA. Okay, so the rest of this presentation is going to be completed by your school assessment coordinator, and they will be coming around to your groups and will have you log into Pearson Access Next, and then they will go through the specifics of tasks to complete on the day of testing. They will go over the important information about the testing ticket and what to do in case there's an interruption. You really need that training like right before, because you'll forget before then. They'll go into very specific how to resume test, how to exit, the ins and outs of how to navigate Pearson Access Next. I could go over it now and you're not going to remember it until you see it and you're logged in to Pearson Access Next, and your school assessment coordinator will go over, how to submit sessions, what to do if a student is exited, locking your units at the end of each testing session, what to do if there are issues, and there will be a couple of issues, and then what to do after testing, etc. Okay, so after your training, this main part of the training, you're going to sign the security agreement form and give that back to your school assessment coordinator. And I wish you all happy testing.